Let's make a laid-back beginner painting of sand dunes at sunrise. In this painting, you will be making some beautiful blue and purple clouds and the sand dunes below them that reflect those same tones. Now, this is a painting done in stages, so that means that you'll be painting for a while and then you'll need to pause the video and let it dry. Just go get something done and come back when it's ready. By the end of this, you will have learned several fundamental watercolor skills and you'll have a painting to either keep for yourself or give to someone as a gift. Welcome to Celebration State, where we help Christians to grow in their creativity and in their love for God as well. I'm laying out the paint tubes for our watercolor painting. We've got alizarin crimson, cadmium yellow, ultramarine, cerulean, and burnt umber. And here are our two basic shapes of brushes that we're going to be using. This big one is good for blending. The little one is good for lines and small spaces. But you can just use whichever one you want as you go, whichever one works. Here's how we mix our paints. These go a long way because we dilute them with water. That pea-sized dab of paint is not what we're using directly on the paper unless it's at the very end for some very vibrant tones. We're using this diluted color right here because watercolor is all about water. Prepare all of your paints this way, even purple, with red and blue if you don't have it, and this will get you ready to go for your painting. Now, if you missed the video where I showed you how to get paper ready for a painting, you can click the link that's on the top of the screen right now. Here we're starting with our first technique. It's water on the paper first. It's almost like you're painting with water, with gentle strokes, not till it's sopping, but just till it's shiny. And then you're ready to start adding color once you get that shiny sheen just over the top third of the painting, that's all. So now with this diluted cerulean blue, I'm coming in very lightly, very delicately, and I'm moving the color with the water over this top part of the painting. And this water is going to let this paint move. It's going to diffuse down into this area. But I want you to notice I'm not taking the blue all the way down. I'm just keeping it on this top part of what I've gotten wet because the bottom part is going to have my yellow. But it's this light blue color, so I come in a little bit more blue to darken that. You could either just leave it light blue, or you could add this as well. It's up to you. It's mostly gonna get covered up by clouds anyways. It's just a little bit of undertone. But this water is going to blend it out for us. It's gonna dry smoother than it is now. And here I'm going to show you, I'm blotting out my paintbrush to get all that blue out because I don't want to make green on accident. But here I go in with some yellow. Mine's a little bit too much yellow, so don't follow that specifically unless you really like the yellow. I'm just coming in on that bottom line, that bottom edge of where I got the paper wet. So this is all the way at the bottom of that. And this yellow is now, it's going to diffuse up to where the rest of the wet paper is. And I'm making it thicker on one side than the other because that is where the sun is coming from. While that's drying, be careful not to smear it, but here I thought we could get started with the first ridge in our sand dunes. Now I'm going to make this diagonal line across, and this is wet paint on dry paper. Notice we didn't get it wet first. So we're just spreading with gentle strokes this diluted purple, which you could either make with ultramarine and alizarin crimson, or if you already have a purple, then that's fine, you can just use that. Here we're using this color diluted with water, and we're spreading it over this whole area. And now that it's wet, here we're adding blue pigment into this wet paint. So this is wet on wet technique, where we're just dabbing gently and letting the watercolors dry and blend themselves. This is what happens when you don't stretch your watercolor painting before. It makes these bows and ridges, which is okay, you can still work around it, but I wanted you guys to see what can happen. So I've gotten this whole top area wet, and we're doing purple clouds. I'm dabbing it in, and then we're also doing this blue color on the very tops of the clouds that we're dabbing in. We're letting it diffuse and blend itself, which it will do because of the wet on wet technique. For our mountains, make sure that the sky is dry when you come in here and do this, but we're painting first wet color on dry paper, and then we're adding the water underneath it that diffuses and lets it sort of carry down and look sort of misty and far away. So it's solid ruffling lines on top, but the water that we're adding on the bottom lets it diffuse into the sand dunes and look like it's far away. I want you guys to notice that I'm reworking this front sand dune because the top of it dried before the bottom part did, and so that's why the colors were kind of splotchy, like cauliflower like that. So I'm just reworking it the same way that I did at first and making sure that the whole thing is wet before I start adding more of that blue color, and it's gonna dry great. For this back ridge of the sand dune, you can do this once the mountains are completely dry, and you're doing it the same way. You're adding wet paint onto dry paper and then adding darker colors into it that are diluted with water, and that's going to diffuse and blend as it dries. Here I want to show you our first removal we're doing with a wet, clean brush. It just has clean water in it, and when you go into dry paint with the brush, with slightly firm strokes. They're pretty soft strokes still, but it will pick up the paint underneath it. So watercolor is very delicate, so just kind of this little brushing, scrubbing motion will take up paint, and this is going to give me a nice subtle highlight here. If I wanted it to be brighter highlight, I would just go in with my paper towel, again needing to be very clean, and I would pick up that water and that color that came up, and that would make it stand out even more. But I like this subtle diffused look for right here, right now. As I go, you notice that I dab my paintbrush on the paper towel, and that's to get off the color that I'm picking up because I don't just want to move that color around. And here I'm doing the same thing with this front ridge, except for I am using a paper towel to make that stand out more. I wanted it to be brighter because it is sand. So here we're coming in with the second ridge, and this does not connect the top, I want you to notice, but it's the same thing. Wet paint, make sure the entire part of this shape is totally wet before you start adding more colors to it. And then these colors are going to create shadows, so I want you to notice we're using blues, we're using purples, and we're concentrating most of the dark blues at the bottom, and the purples are towards the middle. Here we're going to use that same removal technique of a wet, clean brush on dry paint on this back ridge of the sand dunes. And it's creating these two nice highlights for me. Now I'm going in and I'm reworking these shadows. Now this is wet paint on dry paper. The reason why this is not picking up the paint that's under it is because I'm gently feathering it out, and I'm making sure that I'm not being aggressive with my brush strokes or adding too much water that's going to take up or activate the paint that's underneath it. As we're adding this last ridge in between, same thing, wet paint on dry paper, I want you to notice that I am using this sort of scrubbing removal motion with paint on my brush to define the shape of this sand dune and make sure that the way that the sand dunes above and beneath it did not dry in a way that's going to compromise this shape. So you can go in and sort of scrub off paint with your brush, and that can help to just set the defining lines of where your shapes are going to go. I wanted my mountains to have more of a blue color, not so much of that greenish tone that comes from mixing with the cerulean. So I added ultramarine here, and as I was applying it, the paint, I was using sort of strong brush strokes because I didn't want it to get darker. I just wanted it to be bluer. And so I was basically taking up the paint that was underneath it to create this sort of almost cloudy feel for these mountains. So with these dry sand dunes, I'm going in with wet paint and just gently redefining the shadows, making them bolder. I'll come through on the other ones too in a little while. I also wanted to revisit these clouds and make them darker as well. So I just redid the top of it, basically just getting the whole thing wet again and doing the same wet on wet technique. So just clean water and then the pigment on top diluted and letting that diffuse. But you'll see later that I do come back with the paper towel to help the separation a little bit because I didn't want it to look like just one big cloud. I did want to see some sky peeking through. So just be really careful when you do that with the paper towel. Make sure you're not going to smear anything else than what you're trying to. So as I'm adding more shadows to these sand dunes, I want you to notice that I'm using more red tones in the front, warmer tones, and then cooler tones toward the back of the sand dunes, the bluer tones. And this is one of the things that painters can do to make things look like they're going further back, is to make them get cooler in tone as they go. And these are all just very gentle finishing touches that I'm adding to get it looking that sharp, finished look that I like, but you could actually leave it without doing this if that's something you prefer more. Let me know in the comments if there's any area of this painting that you're having trouble with. I would love to help you. I hope that you guys had a blast making this painting and that you learned a lot. Don't forget to tag me on Instagram or email me with your finished painting. I would love to see your work. The next video that we make is going to be about how to remove the tape from around your painting, how to finish it and get it ready to give as a gift. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. Be so blessed.